I rise to speak on the Ethical Investment Crown Financial Institutions Bill. The Green Party will be voting for that bill because the Green Party is a strong supporter of ethical and responsible investment. I think it's important to begin with to kind of talk about what is the rationale behind a bill like this. And fundamentally, there are two basic ideas. The first is that in order that the objective is to make capital cheaper and more available to businesses that are acting responsibly. So for those businesses that are actually not destroying the planet and hopefully trying to make it a better place, we want to make capital cheaper and more available to those businesses in order to make it easier for them to expand and prosper. For those businesses that are actually acting irresponsibly and destroying the planet, we want to make capital more expensive and less available to those businesses. Now, there's of course numerous other ways that we can influence the behaviour of businesses, but one way to do it is through the availability of capital, the cost of capital and the easy accessibility of capital. And so a number of large sovereign funds all around the world have adopted responsible investment criteria in order to achieve that. The second major purpose, I guess, is about us living in a way which we think is ethical and investing our savings, whether those are collective savings through the tax system such as the Cullen Fund or whether they're our own superannuation funds, investing them in a way which is ethical and making a living off them in a way that is ethical. So it's both, if you like, a systemic or a system transforming objective that is to move our economy in a much more sustainable and humane direction, and it's also has objectives, if you like, around ethical behaviour and what's appropriate ethical behaviour. Now, the bill that we have before us tonight will make possibly some small difference towards that, and for that reason we support it. The Greens, of course, have been a strong critic of the Labor Party in the past over its approach to responsible investment, so we're very pleased to see this bill. When the Cullen Fund was introduced in 2001, my predecessor Rod Donald attempted at some great length to put responsible investment clauses within the New Zealand Super Fund bill in order to make that fund, the Cullen Fund, operate in a way that was responsible. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do that, and all we got was a clause that the Cullen Fund was to avoid prejudice to New Zealand's reputation as a responsible member of the world community. That clause that the Labor Party put in that fund then resulted that the fund invested in whale meat, it invested in cluster bombs. In fact, the Cullen Fund was quite like cluster bombs. It was very much into cluster bombs. Invested in companies deeply involved in human rights violations, labour rights violations, severe environmental damage and nuclear weapon systems. So the Cullen Fund, it had some very modest direction on responsible investment, but the direction was so weak that the Cullen Fund then proceeded to invest into all sorts of things that most of us would find reprehensible, though obviously not all of us in the House. And so the problem was that while originally with the Cullen Bill we tried to put some responsible investment clauses in it, we were blocked at that stage in spite of Rod's best efforts to try to put a responsible investment clause into the bill, and the result was that then the fund went off and started investing in all sorts of things. Now, the fund, of course, is still invested in all sorts of reprehensible things even today, which is why, and this is in spite of the Green Party campaigning outside of a legislative framework to get the fund out of numerous things. We did manage to get the fund out of whale meat. We managed to get the fund out of tobacco. We've managed to get the fund out of cluster bombs, which is a great thing. But the fund is still invested, for example, in BAE and United Technologies, which make nuclear weapons delivery systems. The fund is still invested in Halliburton, which of course is a profiteer from the Iraq War. It's still invested in Rio Tinto and Freeport, which are causing massive environmental damage. And of course it's still invested in Walmart, which has very poor working conditions and is renowned for its union busting. These are all companies, with the exception of Halliburton, which have been ruled out by the Norway Pension Fund. The Norway Pension Fund is the biggest or second biggest sovereign fund in the world that takes all the oil profits from that go into the Norway Pension Fund, and that invests them in a way which is ethical. And so they have ethical criteria, which means that they pull out of lots of these firms the super funds invested in. For that reason, we support this bill and making modest progress towards cleaning up the sovereign funds so that they behave in a way and invest in companies that actually are helpful to our future rather than detrimental.
I call Honi Hauera.
Tēnā tātou katoa.